So in this lesson, we're going to use Vertex Paint to define only certain areas of an object to burn. This is very simple to set up. So just so you're not intimidated by this, I want to show you on a very simple example. So let's just make a torus first. And it's important that you give it a lot of resolution because Vertex Paint basically will only paint one polygon at a time. So if you need detail, you need to add more poly. So I'm gonna do 64 sides and let's do maybe 64 segments. And you can just go under the modify panel and add Vertex Paint right here. And then make sure you click on Vertex Color Display Shaded so you can actually see it in the viewport. So it's pure white by default, and pure white means 100% emission and pure black means no emission in Phoenix language. So we need to actually make it black first. So I'm gonna make this color pure black and click on this bucket, and this bucket will paint everything black. And then you can switch this color back to white and select this brush. And now you can paint whichever areas you want to be white. And you can change the brush size with this size here. And you can also play with the opacity. So remember, 100% opacity means 100% emission. So 50% opacity will basically cut the emission of fire or smoke by half. So I'm just gonna leave some areas black and make some areas gray and leave some white so you can see the difference. So maybe let's make this gray as well. And we can turn off edged faces so you can see this much nicer. And now let's just select the torus and click on this Phoenix FD preset for the fire. So it's gonna do its thing. And let's select the source, and for the emission map here it says no map, so you can click on that and let's just select vertex color. And now if I hit start simulation, you can see that only the areas that are painted brighter than black are emitting anything at all, and the areas that are gray are actually emitting less fire than the areas that are pure white. And we're gonna just use this exact same technique to do it on this ladder here. So I replaced the torus with this wooden shelf model, and I used the exact same technique I just showed you to just paint some of these areas white. Now they're not showing white, they're showing as the wood texture because the model has this wooden texture on it. But as far as Phoenix is concerned, these areas are white and these areas are black. So you can still go back in and just pick the brush and paint more areas to be on fire if you would like, and it's super fun to modify as you go to set more areas on fire, so maybe something like this. And as far as the fire settings, they are actually almost the same as what we did for the skull in the previous lesson. So you actually now have all of the tools to set this up, and I would challenge you to pause the video and see if you can figure this out on your own. So you already know how to use the Vertex Paint to only make some areas of your object be on fire, and you know how to set up a fire simulation and adjust the settings to get a realistic look based on the previous lesson. So if you're feeling up to it, I would challenge you to do that. But of course, I'm gonna show you how to do it right now, step by step. So as always, let's start by creating a Phoenix grid around our object. And I know that the fire will be pushed to the right, so I'm not too worried about the left side. I just want to make sure that everything is covered like this. And let's also make a source right away. And for the source, I'm gonna add our shelf as the emission object, and our text map is again gonna be the vertex color. Now, because this is a much bigger object, and I've done this before, I know that I need about 400 centimeters for outgoing velocity. Temperature can stay at 2000. And let's give it a little bit of noise, so maybe 0.3. And then let's adjust the dynamic settings. So first, under grid, actually 2 million total cells to start with is fine. We can do gemmed minus on Z. And we can do adaptive grid enabled by temperature with 1000 threshold, just like we did before. That's all good. And then under dynamics, I would do maybe 0.2 for cooling. Let's do 0.3 for the smoke dissipation. Let's do buffered for the conservation method with 0.3 for randomization And we can maybe lower the massive vorticity to just 0.2, and let's give it a quality of 40 with 2 steps per frame. So I'm going over these settings fast because I already covered them in the previous lesson, so I just want to sort of recap everything and show you with a different conservation method. In the previous lesson we did direct smooth, so let's do buffered in this one and see what kind of results we get. Also, I forgot I would also do 0.8 for the time scale, just like we did before, so it's not too fast. And everything else is standard. So as always, under preview, let's enable the GPU preview. And under output, let's output velocity. And before I run the simulation, let's add the plane force too to push the fire to the right. So again, under helpers, let's add a plane force and rotate it 90 degrees to the right, and we can give it maybe 500 centimeter strength. That should do. And let's run the simulation, see what we have so far. All right, so I'm running the sim and I'm already not happy with what we're getting. I think I'm gonna turn off the smoke for now, so we can just work on the fire and we can still add some of the smoke later. I'm gonna set the noise back to 0 because it seems like the noise is way too strong for this. And I'm gonna go back under dynamics and let's just turn off massive vorticity completely. And let's maybe let's do 0 for the randomization as well, because it seems like the buffered mode is really sensitive to any kind of vorticity or noise. The fire is basically just flying all over the place instead of being more uniform. So with those changes, let's run the simulation again. All right, so I'm running the sim and it's still not looking as expected. And it's because I forgot to turn on the apply force behind icon. And technically the fire right now is behind the icon, just like I taught you in one of the early lessons. So as you can see, it's easy to make that mistake. So make sure you check this. And I also ended up turning off the vorticity completely. So we're doing no vorticity, not even classic one. So I just made this 0. And now if I run the sim, we should be getting something that is closer to my original example here. So let's run it again. All right, so we are finally getting some pretty nice fire. I think it's still a bit too much fire overall. So I lowered the outgoing velocity from 400 to 300. And I think I'm actually gonna make it 250 because I still feel like it's a bit too crazy and explosive. So for now, I'm gonna say that these settings are good for the fire itself. And let's just go under their volumetric options. So under rendering, let's do volumetric options. And under fire, I think right away I'm just gonna lower the multiplier to see more of the detail down here. So maybe let's make it something like 0.24. And now we need to play with this curve again to bring up some of this detail of the flame. So I'm gonna raise this, I'm gonna double click and raise this point all the way up to brighten that. And I'm gonna make another point here and another point here, maybe just drag this lower, make another point here, drag this lower. Okay, now I'm getting what I want. So I'm making the hot areas less bright again, just like we did in the previous lesson. So I'm liking maybe something like this. So I'm gonna actually brighten up the whole thing with the fire multiplier again. And I'm really just looking at these edge flames. I'm trying to get as much of this edge detail of the flames as I can. So I'm just gonna brighten this way up, and then I'm gonna lower the brightness of those hot flames in here. So maybe I can make another point here and lower this one as well. And now I'm really getting some nice detail to show up. And you kind of want to leave a little bit of that hot core in there because that is a realistic thing. You would see that in real life. So you want a little bit of white, but I always try to get just those edge flames to pop as much as possible. So maybe something like this is a pretty good start. And let's maybe play with some of these colors a little bit. So let's make this edge color a bit darker. And then I'm gonna drag this out and see that it gets way more orange. And so maybe something like this. And I want the edge flames to be kind of more reddish. So I'm gonna drag this more into the red territory. And you can always just drag the slider to see what kind of effect it has on the whole simulation. So I kind of like that orange look. So I'm gonna stick with that for now and say that this is pretty good to move forward. And now, just so we can see what kind of effect it has on the scene around it and get some of this nice illumination of the floor, I'm gonna go under Create, V-Ray, and create a V-Ray plane. And you can just give it a standard V-Ray material. So standard V-Ray material, and I'm gonna make it almost pure black, so kind of a very dark gray, and apply that to the V-Ray plane. And then I think it might be nice to have kind of a wall behind the fire, so let's just do a standard box as well. And let's apply the same V-Ray material to this wall. And for my render settings, again, I would just do bucket 1, 2, and light cache of 1000. And let's put our camera in place. It's unfortunate because of the GPU preview, the fire will disappear wherever it comes in contact with geometry like this. Hopefully they're gonna fix this in future releases, but for now, this is what it's gonna look like, and let's hit render and see what we get. Alright, so this is what the render looks like right now, and obviously the issue is that these areas that are on fire, the ladder is pure white, and that's because, as you can see here, it's a nice example of how the curve works. Even though the curve goes down, it goes up, and this corner is still being rendered. It's above 0 basically. So these hot temperatures that are near 2000 Kelvin, they are being rendered. So we actually need to drag this point and watch over here how the white areas will disappear. So I'm dragging until all of that pure white is gone. And so now I'm gonna render again and show you what this will look like without the pure white areas. But even without them, I feel like the fire is kind of not very strong. It's kind of very transparent. So I'm gonna boost the fire multiplier to 1.5 and see if we get a nicer result, and hit render. Alright, so this is the updated render, and I really like this. And remember, this is still very low res. We haven't even simmed this with high resolution to get some really nice detail in these flames. And already I'm thinking this is a pretty nice result. So if you would like for the fire to illuminate the scene more, which I think would look nice, you could increase the light power on scene to maybe 1.5, or let's just make it 2 right now so we can really see that. And let me render this one more time. And just by the way, this took about 1 minute and 10 seconds to render this, so really not bad. Alright, so I'm rendering this with light power on scene set to 2, and I'm not seeing much of a drastic difference, so I'm gonna set this to 5 and see if we get much more brightness in here. And we are, so I think that this is gonna look pretty good when it's done. So before we get to that, let me go back under grid and increase the resolution. So right now we are at about 6 million total cells after the grid expanded. And let's give it maybe 0.8 for the cell size, which on frame 0 gives me about 4.5 million total cells. So that should give us some really nice detail. And I'm gonna run the sim for a few frames, see what kind of detail we're gonna get. Alright, so I ran the sim at higher resolution, and this is what it looks like rendered. Now this is still without motion blur. Remember that if you want motion blur, you need to create a camera by hitting Ctrl+C and then enabling motion blur in the camera settings. So once you're happy with how your fire looks, which I'm gonna say I am right now, just render out a sequence and I'll meet you in After Effects. So in After Effects, this was my final render for the example for the course. It's pretty bland right now, so what I did was I added some color corrections. So first you can do Effect, Color Correction, and add a hue and saturation. And you can just drag the hue wheel until you get some kind of a nicer fire color. So I would say maybe something like this. And you can boost the saturation. Then maybe I would do Effect, Color Correction, Curves, and just boost the contrast overall. So that really makes the fire pop. That's a pretty cool look. You can boost that up as much as you would like. So that looks pretty nice. And then you can also do Effect, Stylize, Glow. And I would do AB colors instead of original colors, and color A you can do like a light orange, and color B, you can do like a darker orange, and then you can drag the glow radius and maybe lower the threshold or increase the threshold. Yeah, something like this. Maybe we can increase the radius even more, turn it on and off. Very subtle, but it's there. And this was pretty much my final fire look. So as you can see, with not that much effort, if you sort of know your way around the settings, which you now do, you can get a pretty cool result pretty fast. So as always, I hope that you guys found this helpful. The project file for this is under the video as always, and I'll see you in the next lesson.